Okay. Last day we had discussed about triggers, like what are the triggers and what are the trigger context variables and what are the trigger type or events. So in short, what actually a trigger was? Trigger is a or like trigger is used to run a piece of logic, apex logic, whenever a record changes. So what are record changes? All possible DML operations. Those are insert, update, delete, and delete. What we do actually like convert, merge. Those are also DML operation only. But obviously, like if you take upset, that will also indirectly either insert or a update will happen. So even though if you are doing upset operation, the DML operation to the trigger will be either insert or a update. So when we look at in terms of trigger, there will be a three DML, sorry, four DML operations: insert, update, delete, and delete. And then in these four DML operations, we have a before and after. For delete, we don't have a before delete event, but for remaining all, we have a before events and after events. So in short, if you look at the triggers, there are two parts of it: before triggers and after triggers. So let's understand why we have a or like when we use a before triggers, when we use a after triggers, and what is the order of sequence, like order of execution. So in the like and what are the basic differences, and we have this trigger context variables or how they are different. We'll see everything. And some of the context variable is like so you understand that, like can someone tell me like what are the trigger new and trigger old? So trigger new and old will have a list of S objects. Let's say if you write a trigger on an account, so your trigger new and old will be a list of accounts, and so trigger new and old will be a list of S object. If you write a trigger on account, it will be on a list of accounts. If you write a trigger on a contact, then those will be a list of a contact. Similarly, if it is a map, the map structure will be a map of ID comma S object. If it is account, and what are the object? It could be custom object. And like if you're writing a trigger on a project, then it would be a map of ID comma project. And again, we have a new and old. I will explain like what is the difference between a trigger.new and trigger.old, and new map and old map. And then we will go into the deeper, like what are the difference between new and old, and then Boolean variables. Those are like trigger is before, is after, is insert, is update, delete, and delete. And along with this, trigger dot is executing.
Choo choo. Choo choo. No, no, choo choo. Choo choo. Choo choo.
So trigger dot is executing. So this is also one of the trigger context variable. So this is used like so how it will be is, so when a trigger is fired because of the record changes, you will be having a piece of code, and from that we can call any method or a class. But the class or method that you are using is going to be like some kind of a utility method, and that will be called from a different context. Let's say it can be called from a visual force page, or it can be called from a trigger, or it can be called from a batch class. But you want to know the context, like what actually the piece of code is going to run. So if you use this
Choo choo.
trigger dot
Choo choo. Put the
trigger dot is executing, so
choo choo.
whenever it is being
Choo choo.
whenever it's being
Choo
fired.
choo. Choo choo.
So when trigger dot is executing is used to know like whether the method is being called from a trigger or not. That's what a trigger or is executing is used to. So if you use this in it inside the trigger, it will always be a true only. And then a basic syntax, I think we have already seen it. Trigger and trigger dot name, sorry, trigger name on a subject could be a standard object or a custom object. It will be in a similar way. So only this will change. Let's say if I write on a project, we can write name. Okay, so far clear? Or we have any questions so that I'll explain further. I think most of them are what we have seen and really little things are new. Do we have any questions here? Hello.
Yeah, no questions, Dolly.
Okay. Now jumping on to the before triggers. So why we use a before triggers and what's the difference between a before and a after triggers? First of all, before understanding the before and after triggers, we have to understand the order of execution when we change the record. That is, whenever we save the record. So here, when I'm saying a save, it could be like any DML operation. Okay, when you start any DML operation, how it will be is first it will be having a page validations. So if you are using any standard page like a visual force page or record edit page, standard record edit page. So there will be like you can make some page validations, right? Like you can make the fields as required fields, or in the layouts also you can make some of the fields as required. So those validation will happen first when you do a save page validations, and then once the page validations are passed, so if the any validation failed, so it will stop there itself. So if it passed the page validation, then next will be a system or sorry, system validations. So when we are saying system validations, those are like all field level validations. So what are the field level validations? Like on field level also we can make the field as a required, right? And then like if you have a length of the fields are restricted. So text field length is 255 and name field length is 80 characters. And if you make some of the fields are like 683 like length, or like if you have a number fields and you enter text those kind of system validation. All these are like what are all validations you have at a field level while creating a field. What all the setup you having, those validation will be checked after page validation. Okay, if it fails, it will fail there itself. It will stop the transaction. If all pass at the system validation level, then it will move on to the custom validations. What are the custom validations? These are the validation rules that we write on a specific objects. After that, if those are passed, then it will move on to the next. If it will fail, it will stop there itself. Okay, once the custom validations are done, so all validations on the record is being done. And then here the before triggers will be fired. Okay, and when you save the record, these are all happening before the record reaches the database. Okay, still at this point of time also, the record not saved to the database yet. Still doing all validations and all only. It's not reached the database yet. So we are in the place of a before triggers. So we have a before triggers, and still at this point of time, the record is not reached the database. So here, if you remember, while I'm explaining before flows, so these records are like sending to the database, so they are not committed to the database. So we have the same changes. Let's say if you take one record, you make one or two changes. So what will happen? Only those two values will be changed, right? But when you look at the transaction or DML process, you will be having the whole record, all possible values in the record, whether you have a value or not. Let's say if you have a account record, for example, we have some fields called name, and then type, and you have a industry. Let's say three fields, or okay, revenue. So you have just four fields. Look, you have more fields also. Assume that sorry, we have four fields. So my DML transaction, what I'm trying to do was I open one account and I change only the type in the account from a customer direct to a customer indirect. All remaining fields I have not touched. So there was a name before and industry before and revenue before. So existing record, I was trying to make a change on type to customer direct to customer indirect. So in this context, what will happen was when I'm sending this, when I'm saving this record, all four values will be sent. Okay, in the before trigger, name anyway have not changed, but before the record is already saved, right? This is already existing record. Whatever the value there in the name field, it will be as is, and in the type, you did change from a direct to indirect. You have changed the value, and industry, you have only one value. You have not changed anything there in the revenue. So what will happen was there will be a two copies. That is what what is the value before you're making change, what is the value after you are making change. Okay, so Oh, the operation what you did was a type on type. So you changed from direct to indirect. So what will happen? There will be two versions. The first version will be what are your latest values after you're making a change, and the other version is before you're making change, what are the values? Those what we call it as a trigger dot new and trigger dot old. These are trigger dot new will consist of your new values. That means what are all the changes you made to the record, those values will be present on the trigger dot new, and trigger dot old will have a old version of the values. Before you're making changes, what are the values to it? If you don't make any change, then both trigger dot new and old will have a same value in that field. Any questions here? Okay. So similarly, same data will be there on the trigger.new map and trigger.old map. So trigger.new map will be having the new values, like after making changes, what are all changes that user did, that will be present on the trigger.new map. What are all the record values before making the changes, that will be in the record old map. The only difference between new map and old map is the structure. Sorry, triggered new and triggered new map is a structure. This is a list. Sorry, this is a list and this is a map structure, collection data type. That's it. That is only the difference. Remaining everything, the data will be in the same format. And other than that, there are some differences based on the event also. Whether we have a data in this trigger context variables or not also will be we'll discuss. Okay. Again, switching back to before triggers. So before triggers or what will happen? So you have this change happen, and so before committing to a database, you're having a values. So in the before trigger, you will be having both values. Like trigger at new and trigger at old will also having a values. So trigger at new will be having a latest values, what all changes you made, and old will have a before you making changes, what are the values will be in the trigger at old. Okay, but the record what is being there, it is not saved to the database yet. So what you can do is you can make changes directly to this values. So what trigger.new is having? Trigger.new is having a values that you have changed. So let's say type you changed from a direct to indirect. So this trigger.new will have the values of type as a indirect for that record. So let's say you have a trigger logic. That is, whenever an account type was indirect, you want to like populate some other field, like industry has to be a so and so industries. Otherwise, the industry is not a right one. You have some kind of a validation you want to do. So you can add your validations. So before triggers are used to populate any data without doing extra DML operations, or if you have any validations that you want to perform before the records being hit to a database. Okay, so before it is reaching a database itself, you will be having the access in the before triggers. So most oftenly, the before triggers are used to perform any kind of a validation or um, to do any record changes without including extra DML. Are we clear here? Can be used to add additional validations or change record values before hitting hitting database without additional DML. That is what the before triggers does. Sorry, before triggers can be used. So after you are doing a before triggers, no, like nothing will start. It will continue. After before triggers, it will save to database. Once it's saved to a database, what will happen? Once it's saved to a database, it will generate IDs if it is insert. If DML operation is insert. Okay. So save it could be any kind of DML operation, right? If it is an insert operation, then after saving to a database, it will generate an ID. If it is not a insert, it's like kind of update, delete, or undelete. There will be no point of ID concept. It just save to a database. That's it. Okay. After saving to database, still it is not finalized. It's saved to database, but not committed. Committed means like if your transaction is success, then only it will be committed to the database. So still the transaction is not completed yet. It's saved to the database and generated the ID. And if you do a SOQL also, now you will get the records. But in before triggers, if you're doing, let's say, insert, and if you're trying to query on the same records, you don't see the records because at this point of time, it is not saved to the database. So after before triggers only, the record will be saved to a database. So once the records are saved to a database, here you will be having a after triggers. After triggers will be fired after record is being saved to the database. So if you understand correctly, the before trigger and after triggers will be a before saving to database and after saving to the database. That's what a before and after means. Now, uh, when you are in the after triggers, like how we did it in the before triggers, you cannot directly change the values in the trigger.new or trigger.new map. You cannot change those values. Why? After because those are just variables. Those are no longer the records is being or like the records are going to save. They already saved. Just they're holding the values of a new version and old version. That's it. But there will be no more operations that is going to happen on a trigger.new or trigger.old. Nothing will happen to them. Those are like a locked variables. If you are trying to make changes also, those are not allowed. Those are going to be read-only values in a after triggers. Let's suppose you want to make some field updates or anything, so you cannot directly perform on this trigger context variables like a trigger out new map. If you want to do anything, you have to write a SQL query and get the records, and on those on those SQL query results only, you can make the DML operation. So if you want to make any change, you can change it and then you can do a save. So DML changes are not allowed on trigger context variables. You can write SQL and then make changes and perform DML. Is this point clear? What actually after triggers? Let's say if you want to make any like field update. So if you have certain criteria and then if you're trying to do some field update, you cannot directly use a trigger.new or new map to make that change. If you want to make change, you have to write a SQL query and then you have to change the values and then um, do operations like a update or delete or undelete. You can do after writing a DML operation only. Okay, so after triggers, we have so many other transactions that are going to happen. So if you're doing again any DML operations, again it will start from a system validations. The process will continue. And if you don't have any DML operations and after trigger, and then you will be having a assignment rules, assignment rules, and then auto response, auto response rules, and then workflow rules, and then you will be having a roll up summaries. When you're having a roll up summaries, the parent fields also get updated, and parent fields updated like here it will again start from here for the parent record. Okay, and then so wherever like in this transaction, wherever you seeing a possible DML operation, like in workflow rules, we can have a field updates, right? Well, there is a field update. Again, it will start from a second step by because these are all internal validations, right? So what will happen was there will be a no page validations will be performed when we are having a internal updates. And one more thing was when we having a workflow rules, what will happen was it even do not perform the custom validations also. It will directly skip the custom validation as well when you are having a workflow field updates. And then roll up summary and what else will be having like mm, email alerts. If you have any kind of email alerts on your DML, the email alerts will be sent at the end, and then the record is being committed to database. Okay, this is how the order of execution will be. There could be some more steps. You can check and I can add those points as well in the order of execution. Now, again, these are like what the background that you need to understand more deeply about the before triggers and after triggers. Now, again, let's jump on to the before triggers. Hope like you will be having some idea like what actually a before triggers when it will be fired. Okay. Now, let's take the scenario of the insert. When a insert operation is performed, so is all with me. When an insert DML operation is happened, when the insert operation is happened, what actually insert is? Insert is you're trying to create a new record, right? So when you're trying to create a new record, all values that you're giving is a new values only, right? There will be no old version of it. Why? Because this is the first time it is receiving the values. System don't know anything about a old version of the values. Did everyone accept? Hello.
Can you say the last line again?
Yeah. When you perform the insert operation, what are all the values we are giving? Those are new values only. There is no concept of a old version, right? Because when you're doing an insert, that is the first time you're entering the values. There is no old version of it.
Yeah.
So there is no before, like before you are doing insert, what is there? Why? Because that's the first time the record is being seen by the system. So when you're performing the insert DML operation in the before, that too in the before trigger context, that means before you are creating record to a database, what you're having is what are the values that you enter, only those will be there. So there is a no concept of a trigger.new editable values will be there on the trigger.new editable new values. What are all the values that you entered to create a record that will be in the trigger.new? So we have a total 4 context variable in this. I'm not talking about all billion variables. What are all we have a record values? Trigger.new, trigger.old, trigger.new map, trigger.old map that I was trying to see here. So in the trigger.new, we will be having the values and we can change also those values. That's why I'm calling those as a editable new values. And then what about a trigger.old? Can someone guess whether we have a values in it or not? Whether it is a valid variable in this before trigger context, before insert trigger. So this is a null value. Why? Because before doing an insert, we'll be not having any values in the trigger.old. Why? Because this is the first time you are creating the record. You will be having only values in the trigger.new. There will be no concept of a trigger to having a values in the trigger.old. Why? Because it's the first time you're creating records and there is no old version of it. So all values are a null. So there is no values in the trigger.old. It's completely null value. What about a trigger.new map? So what is the structure of a trigger.new map? First of all, we need to understand that. Trigger.new map is a structure as a Salesforce record ID followed by the record. So when you are in the before insert trigger, that is your record is not saved to the